All right, now we have a clicker going. So coming back to Amina. Amina has a lot of questions on her mind as she is going to enroll, right? She has never done this before. So where will the enrollment drive happen? How far will it be from my home? What happens if I don't make it? What if she can't tell her name, give her ID properly? She works hard, she works in agriculture, she knows that her fingerprints may not go through. She's scared about that. What exactly is she consenting to? She doesn't trust the government. She's seen people from the government harass her neighbors. She's feeling a bit scared giving all this information. And lastly, who can she really talk to about all these questions? And what happens if the clicker doesn't work? Let's go next. So, unfortunately, some of her apprehensions turn out to be true. Her fingerprints don't match. And after a few months of enrolling, her benefits, uh, after a few months of enrolling, when she goes to collect her benefits, she cannot do that, right? And this brings us to the common challenges that citizens face during the data collection phase. Oftentimes, a lack of digital ID, a lack of authentication leads to service denial. There is often an over collection of personal data. We have heard ID authorities say we have 147 entries of data for every citizen. Oftentimes, there is compelled disclosure of personal data. We know that consent is not really a meaningful concept when we are talking about government schemes because there is such a gross imbalance of power. And lastly, there is always the possibility that this data will be shared across for different purposes. So Amina was not the first instance, and Niger was not the first instance where citizens suffered due to weak safeguards during the data collection process. Here we have three examples: Kenya, Ghana, and India, all three of which have very successful ID systems today, but face significant challenges during the foundational stages. In Kenya, the famous Kibata judgment is when the ID program, after millions of dollars were already spent and IDs were already issued, was rolled out after the High Court ruled that the program was illegal, specifically because a data protection impact assessment was not carried out. In India, we have a lot of exclusion due to authentication failures. The 2016-2017 Economic Survey of India notes that as high as 49% and 37% of users had a failure to match. And this failure to match actually meant that they could not get their subsidized groceries, subsidized grains through the public distribution system. And that was their only way to get that food. So it meant starvation. In Uganda, uh, lack of digital ID led to denial of healthcare services. Sometimes we have stories of pregnant women being refused service at health clinics, which led to the 2022 challenge, which was ultimately unsuccessful. Now we come after data collection to the stage of data storage, and I hand over the mic to my colleague, William.
Thank you, Prakar, for this good setup. So again, my name is William Zhang. I'm the lead cybersecurity specialist at the World Bank's global team. So when we think about how to protect data, many times people only think about how to make sure private data is not accessible to unauthorized users. But you also have to think about the other angles of cybersecurity, which is integrity and availability. You want to make sure the data is only changed by the authorized parties when the data needs to be changed. So when a identity system has so many I guess, stakeholders in the whole ecosystem, either different government agencies, different private sector service providers, you have to look at the security protection from the whole ecosystem perspective, whether every agency who needs to store the data, process data, has the right level of cybersecurity practice. And also all the private sector vendors that you have been working with and you have acquired the technology from, that they provide the right level of security, or at least the options for government to configure the system to have the right level of security. So all these considerations have to be part of your overall cybersecurity strategy when you design the program. And we have a big challenge when data is getting proliferated across the ecosystem, right? From one agency to another, where the original agency may have very good protection, but then the one who is receiving it may be also storing it. Now they may be lacking on the protection side. So maybe we can go back a little bit. So there's also the technology degradation over time issue, where originally maybe your data is sufficiently protected by certain level of encryption, and then over time that encryption is just no longer considered secure. I remember when I first started working in cybersecurity, that's I would say almost 20 years ago. There was something called triple DES for encrypting data at rest. That was considered good enough. But today, nobody would consider triple DES, even though when you use the longest length of the key, it's no longer considered secure enough. So everybody is moving to AES. So you have to keep up with all these trends, because technology evolve, computer become more and more powerful, and you have to keep up with the cybersecurity protection over time. And then, do you have the proper monitoring of all the activities that are going on? I mentioned this integrity issue. Are you monitoring every action to make changes to the data? Is that related to a end user activity from your service portal or your data interoperability platform from your API gateway? Or is that a rogue administrator just making a change because they're trying to retaliate somebody they know? They want to make them no longer eligible for some social benefits. So all these malicious activity has to be monitored in real time, and there has to be record of these unauthorized modification of data, so that you keep integrity of your government systems. And then, do you really have a robust incident response process? Because we all know Murphy's Law, that things could go wrong, will go wrong. Are we prepared? Do you have the right playbook? Have you actually go through the playbook regularly with all the stakeholders to exercise the incident response process to make sure we're all prepared, we're all coordinated, we can respond to an incident in a managed manner, so that we can still maintain the public trust in case something bad that has happened. Now let's move on to the next slide. So here are some examples of bad things that could happen. Bangladesh is one example. We know Bangladesh has been an example for lack of cybersecurity practice. 10 years ago, their central bank had a sufficient or big enough loss that made the whole SWIFT system revamp their overall cybersecurity program. So their citizen identity system was also compromised because of a lack of a good security practice. They just didn't have the proper control, which caused their citizen data to be accessible from a regular public search through Google. And then the second example is Philippines. This is a software developer mistake, right? So when they develop their web-based system, there's something called SQL injection that is very well known to hackers, that they will try every system where they know there's a database behind it. They're going to try these SQL statement to see whether they can just extract all the data out of the database using these kind of malicious SQL statements. And apparently the Philippines developer didn't have this in mind. There was not enough testing of the system, and then the system was vulnerable to this easy attack. And then Brazil. So we know that Brazil typically is considered a relatively mature country from a digital technology perspective. However, they have failed multiple times on their health system. Starting from 2020, there was a breach of the data for their health system because a privileged user credential was exposed in the public domain, and the hackers were able to see that and use those credentials to access a massive amount of health records. And because of that, the hackers were later on able to go into the system again to launch a ransomware attack. And as a result of that attack, all the data were encrypted and no longer available for the health system. And this happened during the COVID period, when people who are traveling, they need to show that they had these COVID-19 vaccination certificate to be able to move around. And then when this data, this record is no longer available for government to verify, they have to postpone the enforcement of this and allow people to move, even without the ability to verify that they have, been vaccinated. So this was a quite, a bad consequence because of the compromise. Let's move on.
So thank you, William, for that comprehensive coverage of risk during the storage phase. So after the storage stage, we come to processing and sharing, right? So let's come back to the Amina story. So Amina managed to get the benefits, and after a few months, the benefits stopped coming. When she goes to the post office to get her check for the cash benefit that is due to her, she is told that she is no longer eligible. She is ineligible because of some investigations going on by government officials, right? And Amina realizes that she has no pathway to challenge this verdict, and she is disempowered and without the benefits that are due to her. Now, why did this happen? At the processing stage, there are three choices that determine the impact on citizens and the risk to personal data. The first being the use of algorithms, which are trained on data containing historical patterns of discrimination. So even if the intention is good, sometimes the historical patterns in the data can lead to a determination which has a high impact on minority groups, leading to exclusion. A lot of times, processing happens in a different country, right? There are analytics firms across the border where lower levels of protections may apply. And because of those lower level of protections and lower level of safeguards, a breach may occur. And lastly, a data set collected for one purpose may be reused for another purpose entirely, which flies in the face of data minimization and purpose limitation, which are core principles of data protection law. Now, these risks are not theoretical. These are incidents that we see every day. And even if we don't connect them to the data lifecycle, to data processing, they are very real. The textbook example of algorithmic discrimination is the childcare benefits investigation in Netherlands, where over 30,000 families were wrongly accused of conducting childcare fraud. Children were taken out of custody because the algorithm used dual nationality and foreign sounding names as risk indicators. In India, we have a classic example of function creep. Data that was collected for one purpose was used for another. Citizens thought they were signing up for a voluntary ID system, only to realize later that that ID system is now required to get a SIM card for a telephone, to open a bank account. And all of this was actually enabled by a rule, explicit rule that allowed body corporates and private sector to use biometric disclosures from the database. And these examples and the examples before show that unless the government tries really hard to have alternative pathways of enrollment, digital ID systems become de facto mandatory, and therefore they need to have safeguards. So to explain this graph, I'll hand over to William for risk at the retention stage.
Yeah, so when countries start to do more and more digital development, their digital attack surface is expanding. And at the same time, when technology start to move further and further, especially with the development of AI, the attackers are now having more and more capability to attack. So with the ever increasing attack surface, plus the or the capability for attacker to attack, also getting more and more sophisticated. You can imagine, right? Without proper enhancing of your defense, you're going to be prone to attacks more and more. So this is, a just a illustrative graph that we're trying to remind people that when you have more and more digital assets out there to support your citizens, you have to invest in proportion on cybersecurity and make sure that you're not having more and more exposure to the more very sophisticated attackers. Next slide, please. So I think the overall cybersecurity architecture is having multiple layers, right? The legal foundation is the fundamental layer. You have to have the cybersecurity law to support whatever the government is trying to do from a cybersecurity perspective. And then based on the law, you can have institutions such as a national cybersecurity authority, and then establish your national level functions such as the computer emergency response team, the security operations centers for the government, all of these, right, from legal to institutional to technical capabilities, and then to platform level controls. And then it's also a multi-stakeholder engagement because you have to have oversight at the organization level for data protection, for cybersecurity work, to have some designated leaders, designated teams to take care of. You also have to have the independent oversight because we all know that we cannot always watch ourselves. You have to have independent parties who are there to take a fresh look at what each organization is doing to see whether they are doing what they are required to do and if they're keeping up with the industry trend. And of course, we have to collaborate with all the stakeholders so that we can all act together under a stress, which means, in case a data breach happens, we have a collaborative response plan that we can execute. So these are the fundamentals. I think we all understand. I think the most important thing is to have these, in your overall DPI and government service implementation plan, have enough investment in these areas so that you don't expose yourself to these threats.
So coming back to Amina and wrapping up our story, With the right safeguards, her story ends differently. It's not ending in denied benefits, in confusion, and in disempowerment. With good protection at enrollment, which provides her different ways of enrolling, information, and transparency, she can give informed consent. With independent oversight and redress, she always has someone to speak to and even file a complaint if that's necessary. If systems are defined with privacy and security built in, then they don't have function creep. They don't keep on expanding. And as they expand, the cybersecurity risks do not scale, right? And with governed sharing and retention and fail-safe design, all of this is thought from day one. This is not thought about retroactively when the costs are much higher. And with that, the outcome is that she enrolls with confidence, her benefits arrive, and when the system fails, which it will fail safely, and trust in digital technologies, digital services holds. And with that, we have a few resources. There's also an excellent note of enhancing cyber's resilience of ID ecosystems that's available there, hard copies, which we would love for you to take. We have other offerings as well, including our blueprint for data protection authorities, which um, is all about strengthening data protection authorities during initial stages. Our work on public key infrastructure and trust frameworks, which you can use the QR code on the screen to access. And with that, thank you so much for being a patient audience and for listening to us. And we move to the next stage.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Prakar. Thank you, William. It has been so great to hear you. This is uncomfortable listening with this. Thank you both for setting up the key risks and safeguards about the DPA data lifecycle. Let us now turn to the institutional question: how data protection authorities can make accountability real in practice. So I am pleased to hand over to Taylor Reynolds, Global Practice Manager for Policy and Regulations in the World Bank Digital and AI Vice Presidency, who will moderate the next discussion. Please come in.
Well, that's been put together. So, okay. Let me start off by just welcoming our panelists. So I'm going to ask each of our panelists to present themselves using the microphone. Give us a little introduction about you and about your organization. I'll start with myself. I'm Taylor Reynolds. I am the practice manager at the World Bank covering policy and regulation in the digital vice presidency. I'm relatively new in this post. I've been here for about 8 months, and I was in academia before that, focused on cybersecurity and internet policy. So let me pass this. I'll pass over to. We'll pass over to you first. We've got Amuda Abu Seidu, who's from Benin. Then we'll have an introduction by Drudeshta Madhub from Mauritius. And finally, from Lorpu Page from Liberia. Amuda, for you.
Oui. Merci beaucoup. Moi, c'est Amouda Abou Seydou, je suis le conseiller rapporteur de l'autorité de protection des données à caractère personnel en République du Bénin. Donc, en quelque sorte, c'est la deuxième personnalité de l'institution. Mon président devait être là, mais il a été empêché, donc voilà un peu. Je le représente sur ce panel. Merci beaucoup.
Good morning. Bonjour. I'm Judesha Madhub, Data Protection Commissioner for Mauritius and President of the Francophone Association of Data Protection Authorities, and also the African Union Chair of the Data Governance Committee and the co-chair of the Commonwealth Network for Data Protection Authorities. I'm very pleased to be here today, and I think that is enough as an introduction. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Lapu Pesh. I'm the Executive Director of the Independent Information Commission. So we are very new in this space. As it is right now, we have a bill that is before the House of Legislature awaiting passage. Once that bill is passed into law, it gives the Independent Information Commission the authority to function as the data protection authority. So practically, we are just very new in this space. Thank you.
Thank you. You can keep them. We'll keep the mic right there for that side of the table. So, one of the things I'm really excited about in this group is that we have all the way from kind of the highest levels of maturity for a DPA down to a DPA where we have a situation where the legislation is waiting to be passed. So we really run the entire gamut here, from Mauritius, which, as I understand, one of the first kind of established DPAs here in Africa, fully aligned with GDPR connections around the world. And then we've got the Liberia with LUPRA, which is working to try and get legislation passed. So I think there's a lot that we can learn here. Let me set the stage a little bit about what we're trying to do with this session. So the key point here is that DPI is very data intensive across the whole data lifecycle, from collection to verification, storage, processing, sharing, reusing, retention, and all the way to deletion. So this is not just a one-time set it up and go. This is really an intense process. The other thing is that DPI functions across sectors. There's not just one entity that's using this data. This is across different sectors and could be across different jurisdictions as well. In addition to this, if that's not enough to make you a little scared about how data is being used, we have algorithms and AI that are now coming into play, and we need to figure out, how do we control this data and how do we regulate the use of this data in a new AI world, which is one of the key questions facing data protection authorities. So if you walk over to where we have lunch, you would get the impression that DPI kind of needs a technical solution, because it's a lot of vendors, a lot of people over there selling products and IDs, and that there's a technical solution to this. But in reality, what we need are laws, we need strong institutions, and we need day-to-day governance. And that, I think, is the really hard part. It's not the technology. We can figure out the technology. It's the governance in an ever-changing, ever-evolving type of situation. So add on top of that. So this is, I think you all have a hard job, all three of you, very difficult job. Add on top of that often these DPAs are working in very resource-constrained environments. So funding is relatively low or non-existent, and you have to find ways to get the DPA funded. You're also in a situation where you may not have the capabilities that are easily to attain in the market for this type of work. So you've got to somehow procure people to come in and work with you with specialized skills. So it is a difficult situation. but it's one that we at the World Bank would love to help in any way that we can. We've got a great team at the bank that works on data protection and privacy, who've put together a blueprint for how to build a data protection authority in a resource constrained environment. It has not been published yet, but it's in its final approval process. So hopefully we'll have some ideas there. The goal with that is to essentially lay out what needs to be done and help with sequencing in a situation like Lorpu's, where, what do we do first? How do we make this happen? So, but that's not what we're here to talk about. So, to start off, I'd like to ask kind of an impromptu question. And let me start off by Amuda and say, where are the items within the DPI ecosystem that cause you the most concern these days? And what are the levers that can you choose a lever that you have that kind of gives you some control over that? What are you thinking? I know this is unscripted, but I'd be interested to have your response.
Ok, merci beaucoup pour la question. Évidemment, comme l'APDP du Bénin, c'est-à-dire l'Autorité de protection des données à caractère personnel du Bénin, ne travaille pas à vase clos. On est dans un écosystème numérique en République du Bénin qui contient donc un certain nombre de parties prenantes de l'écosystème, à savoir, depuis d'ailleurs avant-hier, vous avez constaté la présentation de l'ANIP. C'était l'organe qui est chargé au Bénin donc de centraliser toutes les données des populations. Et aussi, il y a un autre organe que nous appelons ASIN. Ça, c'est la partie, le bras technique même de l'État qui conçoit tout ce qui est e-service en République du Bénin. Donc, c'est eux qui sécurisent tout le système d'information de l'État. Donc, après ça, il y a aussi le CENIN, un organe aussi là qui lutte contre la cybercriminalité, qui permet donc de tracter tout ce qui est cybercriminel et qui donc pouvoir tout à leur dernier retranchement naturellement d'ailleurs. Le CENIN, la CIN, lui, comme je l'ai dit tantôt, c'est d'ailleurs lui qui implémente tout ce qui est partie technique, en tout opérationnel au niveau de l'État. Donc, la PDP, l'Autorité de protection des données à caractère personnel, est donc en collaboration directe avec tout cet ensemble et qui conduit, puisque d'ailleurs, avant de mettre en ligne tout service que la CIN développe, donc ça passe par le contrôle de la PDP. Nous faisons donc ce que nous appelons un test de vulnérabilité. Nous vérifions tout ce qui est, disons, anomalie avant qu'on leur permette donc de le mettre en ligne, donc tout site qui développe ou bien tous les e-services qui mettent en ligne. Voilà un peu comment nous collaborons autour de tout ça.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Judesha, can you tell us about an example from Mauritius?
Okay, I think Mauritius, as you said, we've been working here in this field for almost 20 years. So that was a long time ago when I started the office. And I believe you said it right, because the important aspect is about we see laws on paper right now in the African continent. That is, data protection laws being enacted. But what we want to see actually is now enforcement, how effective enforcement is being carried out. What are the proper enforcement mechanisms that are being adopted across the African continent? What are the models of data protection laws that they are adopting, whether they're in compliance with international standards? You will probably agree with me when we look across the continent, what we see is in some countries we have strict data localization requirements. For example, limiting cross-border data flows. And this is also understood because the element of trust is actually very weak. But we also, we want to see a trust reinforced, but trust is not being reinforced. And the problem is that we are having so many challenges with systems that we, in fact, we're going the other way around. instead of reinforcing trust, we're actually weakening trust in a way. So, because of what I've seen, the beautiful presentation just before, is why is the rise in data breaches happening? Is because we're not complying with data protection laws. So, compliance, enforcement, accountability are all multi layers of this trust component that are missing to actually make trust effective. So laws in themselves are not enough for sure. Institutional capacity is definitely the biggest thing. From my own experience, I've seen that we want to comply with international standards and we actually put in laws in place. But then we stop there, right? We don't move forward in a very, let's say, disciplined approach towards enforcement. That is, these laws are here, okay, we are comfortable that we have laws because this is what is required internationally. But we actually fail in making these laws work because we don't feel compelled to make these laws work in our jurisdictions. And when these data, for example, I said it the other day, political commitment is something so difficult to actually win in terms of data protection. Here we're dealing with fundamental human rights. And human rights institutions have always been taken very lightly by governments. That's a fact. Now, to be able to persuade them that surveillance is not good for the country, surveillance is something they should not do, it's actually going on their territory and telling them not to do things we like to do. So I have so many things to say, by the way, but I don't know, you can stop me. But if you allow me, is that I think effective regulation in 2026 for this year is about having digital forensics, cybersecurity, data protection, and data governance. Data governance is at the heart of any enforcement activity becoming successful for a DPA, and also governance from public institutions and private organizations. I will come back to this point if you allow me later on.
You said forensics, cyber, data governance,
I said digital forensics, cybersecurity, and data protection, and data governance.
Thank you very much. Okay, Lorpo. So you are in a very different situation. You're at the beginning of the 20-year cycle that Rhodesia is just entering. What do you see as kind of your biggest challenge and what you think needs to happen first?
So, what I see as a bigger challenge, and this is not just unique to Liberia, especially for new data protection authority, is the ability to acquire funding to adequately ensure that people personal data are respected. So I see that Africa is doing well in terms of passing the law, but passing the law is just not sufficient. You need to, at least the government needs to allocate from the beginning funding to implement the law. The law is not just going to move from just the law to enforcement by itself. You need support. You need support and partnership and other things that will ensure that we have the effective implementations of data protection.
Can I come back the other direction? Rhodesia, can I ask a bit of a follow-up question here because in a previous session, you had highlighted that laws are not enough. Compliance is not the same as accountability, and accountability is not the same as enforcement. So, how do you explain these distinctions to public institutions that believe that, hey, we're in compliance, everything should be okay? Because I think this ties into what Laura was saying.
Right, because what I've seen is that people play with compliance a lot because they choose what they want to comply with and what they don't want to comply with. And at this level, in my own country, I remember attending a conference and the person was talking about demonstrative compliance. And I told her, you know, compliance is compliance. Whether you demonstrate it or not, it has to be an inherent culture in your organization, is that you actually breathe compliance. You don't just showcase compliance, but you have to actually integrate it into the very architecture of your organization. That is accountability. Um, what I was trying to say, to with all these layers, is that accountability is for the controller, right? You are the private organization or public organization. You are responsible. You are accountable. Enforcement is for the regulator to enforce. We have specific scenarios here. And compliance generally is such a generic term that we actually get lost into it. And so that's why I tried to ensure that these different concepts are with the right people and we in the right frameworks. So this is what I meant by this. But I believe, if you will allow me in this point, is I'm very thankful to the World Bank for the support they gave us for our national data strategy that I happened to make for Mauritius. And data governance from this perspective is not only about personal information here, it's about every data. And this framework is coupled with four implementation tools that we call the Model Data Governance Framework, the Data Retention Policy, the Data Sharing Protocol, and the Data Sharing Framework. So these documents, actually, I believe these documents are going to help data governance in all organizations, because people, many institutions, I think that's a common problem, say we don't understand data protection, we don't know how to go about data protection. And in our context, because we know this problem is so real, is that's why we came with this mandatory appointment of data protection officers. And we do train them, like, okay, 600 have already been trained, and we're going, yes, we are going further. And the enforcement mechanisms that we use through our law, certification, we do certify bodies, as being compliant with data protection. That's a big deal because it's like an ISO assessment done by the Data Protection Office. And we have data protection impact assessments, record of processing operations, notification of data breaches, compliance audits, security checks. And all these elements that I'm talking about, they are online on our eDPO system. So anyone can just go on the system, they download the form on the DPO, and they fill it in and they submit it to us, and then we start reviewing inspections, site visits, and we see how far they are complying with this. But most importantly is registration. We have maintained registration of controllers in our law because we believe that this is a way for us to be able to ascertain our clientele. And that is how they pay every 3 years a small amount of money online, and they get registered. So we have 60% of our population in terms of controllers and processors who are registered with us. 40% are still non-compliant. This is why this year we are coming with very strong amendments in our Data Protection Act. We are introducing administrative fining. We had already offenses, but offenses take a lot of time for prosecution. So we are coming with a fast track mechanism of administrative fines, just like under the EU GDPR. So we are able to do it directly. We don't need to go through police and other institutions for prosecution to be done. And we will fine them huge sums of money, in our context, up to maximum of 5 million rupees, Mauritian rupees, and or 3% of the net turnover of the company. So this is where we are, and we have various roles. I think we have tried to innovate very much in our ways because of limited resources. And we have a private GPT solutions to answer people on whatever queries they have on the office, and they can just go on it and they find all the elements that they need to do. The eDPO system has got, it's fully computerized, and also towards the way we are going to be a training institution. We are already, this is going to be happening this year. That is training all data protection officers, professional trainings delivered by the Data Protection Office itself instead of going for private partners doing it. And we certify the training institutions also who will do actually the training for data protection officers if it's not us. And we are professionalizing that service, and it will be a paid service because we want people to get professional service and professional tutors how to deliver trainings on data protection. So this is what we are aiming for this year, and 2026 is really a big year for the Data Protection Office for Mauritius. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. That's great. When we came across, when I was thinking through these questions and I thought about compliance, I come from the cybersecurity side, and a lot of times, compliance is a checklist. And I remember being in a meeting with the CISO of a very large internet company, and saying to them, well, tell me about your, you have these checklists, these requirements that you need to do for cybersecurity. And they said, oh, yeah, we just fill those out, but they may or may not be right. Like, they didn't even care. And it wasn't exact. It was just a process, a form they had to fill out. And I really liked what you said about this is about culture, this is about training the people, this is about registering the people who are doing this. Very good. Okay, let me turn to Amuda next. So I've got a question for you. How do you keep the DPI operators inside the government aligned with lawful purpose and proportionality when new integrations are proposed? We've heard examples of this in the previous session about kind of expanding horizons. How do you do that? How do you keep the operators aligned with lawful purpose?
Ok, merci beaucoup. Avant de répondre à votre question, permettez-moi de revenir un peu en arrière par rapport aux défis dont vous avez parlé précédemment, parce que le défi, cette question me préoccupe beaucoup. Les défis, si on prend l'exemple du Bénin, par exemple, nous sommes une autorité indépendante, on ne reçoit aucune institution du gouvernement, ni du législatif, tout ça là. Mais malgré ça, on reste dépendant du budget de l'État, puisque c'est l'État qui met à notre disposition le budget de fonctionnement. Alors, le grand défi maintenant, c'est pour pouvoir donc sensibiliser, former toutes les populations, même les analphabètes, pour qu'ils comprennent les questions, la problématique des données à caractère personnel et par rapport à la protection de la vie privée. C'est très important. Nous procédons donc à des formations par secteur d'activité, par cible, ainsi de suite. Alors, ce défi au niveau national, il est vraiment très important à relever. Et un autre défi dont je pense encore, qui est très important, c'était le défi au niveau africain, c'est-à-dire qu'aujourd'hui, nous avons des lois disparates. Donc, il faudrait que nous réussissions un jour à harmoniser nos lois, nos réglementations en matière de protection des données à caractère personnel. Et donc aussi, au besoin, mutualiser nos infrastructures techniques, puisqu'il y a des pays qui sont en avance plus que d'autres. On peut réussir à mutualiser nos infrastructures techniques. Et au niveau mondial, en tant que défi aussi, je pense au contrôle des flux migratoires au niveau des frontières. C'est aussi très important. Donc, pour atteindre tous ces objectifs, nécessairement, il faut des moyens. Heureusement que la Banque mondiale est là. Bon, donc je pense que ce serait un plaidoyer que nous allons donc formuler à l'endroit de la Banque mondiale. Maintenant, pour revenir à votre question, je crois que en ce qui concerne le Bénin, nous procédons d'abord, la loi oblige tout traitement de données à caractère personnel à faire une mise en conformité auprès de l'autorité. Ça, c'est une obligation. Pour l'administration publique, c'est systématique. Ils doivent d'abord mettre en place ce que nous appelons le DPO, qui gère donc la mise en conformité de tous les traitements qu'opère l'administration publique. Au niveau des privés, on leur impose ça pour qu'ils puissent donc procéder à la mise en conformité des traitements de leurs structures respectives. Alors, nous procédons, ainsi il y a des contrôles. Nous procédons des contrôles au niveau des structures pour s'assurer que ces structures sont en conformité vis-à-vis de l'autorité. Et particulièrement, la structure qui gère les données, la base de données de l'ensemble des populations du Bénin. Nous avons fait des contrôles au niveau du data center pour s'assurer du niveau de sécurité qui a été implémenté. Puisque là, c'est très important. C'est la donnée de près de 12 millions, 14 millions aujourd'hui de populations que compte le Bénin. Donc, nous avons procédé à des contrôles au niveau de ces data centers pour s'assurer des infrastructures, les niveaux de sécurité qui est implémenté. Donc, aussi, au niveau des autres structures, les privées, là, nous leur fait injonction de pouvoir faire, de mettre en place donc un niveau organisationnel de sécurité et technique aussi pour pouvoir donc assurer la confidentialité, la disponibilité et l'intégrité des données. Donc nous veillons beaucoup à ça. Nous faisons des contrôles à distance, nous faisons des contrôles sur site et nous faisons aussi des contrôles, donc disons, par téléphone, un truc comme ça, sur site, à distance, et puis aussi avant la mise en ligne de tout système, de tout ce que nous appelons site, nous procédons à un test de vulnérabilité qui nous assurer donc des niveaux de vulnérabilité donc de tout site avant sa mise en ligne. Donc, en grosso modo, nous procédons beaucoup à des missions de contrôle pour donc, après donc, la délivrance donc, des autorisations pour s'assurer de la mise en œuvre vraiment de nos recommandations et injonctions.
If I can ask you a follow-up question. So, with the speed at which AI and other technologies are evolving, I imagine there are controllers who have received permission to use, have gone to the DPA, had a sign off that we can use the data a certain way, but all of a sudden want to use it in a new way that probably goes beyond the scope of what they originally asked for. Do you have, what's the process in Benin for this, for dealing with those situations? Is there a demarcation when they're supposed to come back and ask for reapproval?
Merci beaucoup. Je crois que par rapport à ça, évidemment, quand une autorisation est donnée au préalable, si malheureusement, disons, la structure veut changer donc, de traitement, c'est-à-dire on appelle ça, disons, évolution du traitement ou alors disons, la personne est obligée de revenir pour pouvoir forcément refaire une mise en conformité parce que les autorisations que nous donnons couvrent une limite donnée, des données à traiter et aussi la durée de conservation par rapport aussi à un certain nombre de principes que nous retenons sur le premier dossier qui est donc introduit. Maintenant, il faut dire aussi que par rapport à l'intelligence artificielle, l'État du Bénin a donc élaboré une stratégie, une politique nationale de gestion donc, de l'utilisation des données de l'intelligence artificielle. Donc, par rapport à cette utilisation, elle est encadrée par la loi et aussi, donc, n'importe qui ne peut donc utiliser l'intelligence artificielle à sa guise comme il veut, mais en tant qu'autorité de protection des données à caractère personnel, dès lors que vous introduisez une demande qui encadre un traitement donné, si c'est la recherche scientifique, dans le cadre de la recherche scientifique ou peut-être aussi des enquêtes, vous avez l'obligation, si le changement, disons, si le traitement doit évoluer, vous avez l'obligation de revenir au niveau de la PDP pour obtenir une autre autorisation. Puisque les finalités ne sont pas les mêmes, vous êtes alors obligé de revenir pour donc introduire notre dossier, pour nous soumettre à l'étude que les conseillers se réunissent pour apprécier et voir la possibilité de vous donner cette autorisation ou non.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. Okay, Lord Pu, I'm coming back to you. So you've heard some of the challenges that people are having in terms of the situation now. How would you, as you're building a new data protection authority, ensure the transparency and accountability in the governance of DPI from the beginning? So how do you do it from the beginning? Determine scope.
Yes. I think from the beginning of a new as a new DPA, it's important that you build your DP.
it switched from English to French. I think we got swapped lines. So let's try now.
So I think it's important that ensuring accountability and transparency, especially when you are building a new DPA, is important that you build on trust, which is very important. That people need to trust you before they can be able to reach out to you. So I think having a very strong governance framework that holds people accountable, people in institutions that manage DPR system accountable on how they collect or store news and process personal data. Also, I think also communication is also very key. People have to know exactly what you're doing as a new TPA. Promoting transparency through communication, that is very important. And also what is also important is ensuring that institutions also that operate DPR system required to demonstrate compliance. Compliance is very key. Also, what also is important is how you also, as you go along, how you create complaint redress mechanism, and then also I think that ensuring accountability is just the combination of transparency, oversight, how you engage the public on a regular basis, and also how you ensure that we have clear safeguards for institutions that are managing DPR system.
Great. Thank you very much. Okay, Judesha, this one is for you. Oh, I think we're flipped again. Okay, there we go. Here's a question for you. Many African countries have adopted data protection laws in a relatively short period of time. You have said earlier that this decade, the next decade, is really going to be about operationalizing data protection. From your experience in Mauritius, what does that shift actually require in practice beyond just having a law in place?
Thank you for the question. As I said, we believe protection in practice, right? Versus laws on paper. And what I want to mean by this is that if a regulator wants to be, credible and respected in his own jurisdiction, he needs to be very much on the ground. That is, doing inspections, taking enforcement actions, whatever is the form of the enforcement. For example, we are serving around every year 3,000 enforcement notices because the number of breaches that's happening is incredible and also very serious. As I can say, we saw just before the Bangladesh and other countries, but we are also having these types of breaches in Mauritius. And here we're not targeting only private organizations. And we have just issued a circular mandating all public authorities to do DPIAs for all projects in government. And that means a lot of institutions, let's say we have around 50 ministries, I think, but departments, we have many more. So we are targeting around 500 data protection impact assessments. And we have already embarked on this activity, and we are getting good response and good collaboration. At the same time, a lot of weaknesses being seen, but we are able to do it on a progressive basis where we actually collaborate with them to ensure that they reach the good destination. And there's one point in our law that we introduced in 2017, that is amicable resolution of disputes. That is, before we go for prosecution, And I must tell you, 99% of our cases are being resolved that way, and in the good way, efficiently, because in a matter of months, we are able to come to a decision together, an agreement as to what you're going to do forward. It's a formal agreement. And if you breach that agreement, you are definitely we are going for prosecution if that is required. Up to now, no, but this is how we work because we have a small population, 1.3 million people, and we have seen very serious, breaches during last elections regarding data. And if you will allow me to say this with due respect to our governments, is that the only criteria which determine the last government to fall out is data protection breaches that they have done with regard to people's information and communications, and this made them lose the government in total. So this is how I've been able to leverage this government's, obligation to be able to put data protection in our vision for this government at the top of the priority for government. And it's in our vision transformation agenda for 2025 up to 2030, where protection of personal information is being given its right due after such a long time. Yeah.
If I can ask a quick follow-up there. Population of 1.3 million. You had 3,000 enforcement actions per year. How large is the DPA? How many staff is producing 3,000 enforcement actions?
We are seriously understaffed. That's why we leverage all innovative solutions that we can find on the market to be able to, complete our resourcing structure. I must tell you that it's very hard, but we are going to be improved this year and next year as well. And we're exploring, contractual, recruitments, which was not possible before. But now, with the amendments to the law, we are going to be able to contractually recruit people outside the public service, which will be good for us. Yeah.
A second quick follow-up. In the past, I've worked with New Zealand and their telecommunication regulator. And when I visited, I was surprised to see how many non-New Zealanders work for the regulator. Is that something that Mauritius would be open to, is having, bringing people in to work with DPA?
So we are exploring very, very concretely this proposal. And actually the government is also, we're working with the government of India to see how we can get some support from them. And if this for our digital forensic lab, they are definitely going to help us as well. Yeah.
Fantastic. Okay. Adamu, no, so yeah, Amuda. Let me ask you the next question here about Benin. So, what has been the most effective for building compliance culture and public bodies that share data with public bodies that share data informally? So, think about templates, guidance, MOUs, DPIA expectations, or joint working groups. Have any of those been the most effective at building this compliance culture that we've been talking about today? And how do you keep lawful purpose meaningful once those systems do become operable?
Ok, merci beaucoup pour la question. Évidemment, avec le gouvernement, d'abord au niveau de notre institution, il y a un commissaire du gouvernement près de l'APDP. Cette personne a été nommée par le gouvernement. Donc, elle sert plutôt de point focal entre l'autorité et le gouvernement. Donc, ça fait qu'avec elle, ça facilite les relations avec le gouvernement. Donc, toutes les structures gouvernementales ont l'obligation de faire la mise en conformité de leurs traitements. Et nous, en tant qu'autorité, nous avons procédé quand même à des visites de courtoisie à tous les ministres, au niveau de tous les ministères, pour déjà les faire comprendre que l'obligation de mise en conformité de leurs traitements C'est même pas parce que même le chef de l'État, quand il a voulu sécuriser l'accès à la présidence, il a demandé une autorisation. Donc, on a fait d'abord cette démarche de faire comprendre aux autorités administratives elles-mêmes qu'elles ont l'obligation de remplir les formalités avant de procéder au traitement des données à caractère personnel. Donc, la partie qui est très émouvante par rapport donc, à nos collaborations, à notre collaboration avec l'État, c'est que normalement, quand nous voulons faire des activités données, nous avons procédé à des formations. Donc, les ministères même qui ont écrit, qui ont sollicité la formation auprès de l'autorité pour pouvoir donc faire former le personnel au niveau de chaque ministère. Donc ça, c'était un point fort pour nous de pouvoir mobiliser donc tout le personnel de tous les ministères et procéder à leur formation. Maintenant, quant aux autres aspects de relation avec le gouvernement, quand on a quand même besoin d'un certain nombre de moyens pour pouvoir procéder donc à un certain nombre de contrôles, ils mettent à notre disposition. Par exemple, si on veut procéder à des missions de contrôle, nous avons les policiers qui sont mis à notre disposition, qui nous accompagnent pour ces missions de contrôle sur le terrain, puisque en cas de résistance donc, du responsable de traitement, donc ces policiers nous accompagnent en cas de qu'est-ce qu'il a. Donc, ça fait partie des relations que nous avons donc entretenu, développées avec le gouvernement. Aussi, dans le cadre des élections passées, nous avons noué un partenariat avec l'organe qui était en charge donc, de l'organisation de cette élection qu'on appelle la Sénat. Donc là, avant donc l'affichage de la liste électorale, nous sommes descendus d'abord sur le terrain pour s'assurer, puisque d'abord en amont, on les avait déjà dit un certain nombre de données qui ne doivent pas être affichées sur les listes. Donc, a posteriori, nous sommes donc allés contrôler après l'affiche pour s'assurer qu'effectivement, la Sénat a respecté notre injonction par rapport donc, au nom, c'est-à-dire un certain nombre d'informations qui ne doivent pas être figurées sur la liste électorale. Donc, après ça, nous avons un certain nombre de partenariats comme ça avec le gouvernement qui fait que, donc, ils savent aujourd'hui que nous sommes au cœur de tous les traitements. Eux-mêmes, avant de procéder à n'importe quoi, ils demandent notre avis. Tout récemment, ils ont un projet de déploiement de la vidéoprotection dans la ville de Cotonou. Donc, l'État, à travers le code du numérique, il a un article là qui demande que pour avis, c'est-à-dire pour plutôt une décision que l'État doit prendre sur la collecte massive des données personnelles qui doivent avoir d'impact sur la vie privée des populations, l'État doit pouvoir prendre l'avis de l'autorité. Donc, ils nous ont consultés aussi. On les a accompagnés à élaborer l'analyse d'impact avant de les autoriser à donc prendre le décret en Conseil des ministres et le déploiement de cet équipement est en cours présentement. Donc, voilà un peu comment nous collaborons. Donc, aujourd'hui, l'État même comprend que nous sommes au cœur de tout et sans nous, pour toute chose qu'ils veulent faire, ils sont obligés de pouvoir nous consulter.
Thank you very much. Okay, for my last question, I'm going to, this is out to Lord Pu. And then we will open up for questions. So be thinking of questions that you have. We'll have some time left to discuss, which I'm happy for. So, Lord Pu, you're at the exciting point right now where you are starting this process. So, what do you think are the most foundational priorities that you have to put in place to support these new DPI context? So, what's your first priority?
So, thank you for the question. Um, we have working currently with the World Bank, who is helping us to set up an initiative framework. And I want to use this opportunity to say a very big thank you to the World Bank for the support they are giving unto us. So I think the first foundational priority would be the passage of the law. We need to have a legal framework in place because it gives you the power, the authority, and the responsibility to function in that capacity as data protection authority. And also it also gives the institutional spell out institutional obligation in terms of compliance with data protections. So the foundational priority, the first one is to ensure that we do have the law. And secondly, I think another priority that we're also working with on is building institutional structure and capacity. So I think we according to our law, soon to be law, it gives us the independent commission to use already existing functions. To so 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 now the data protection would just be an additional function to the already existing function that we already have. So in terms of setting our institutional structure is that we're just going to have a data protection directory within the already existing structure that we have. So one of the things that we are working on is to ensure that we set up that directory. So, and it requires us hiring key staff. For instance, we also in the process of hiring consultants that will act as legal and ICT. And also, we also use our already existing structure that are there that are also in alignment with DPA in terms of compliance and outreach. So that is where we are right now. And then also, we also in the process of building the capacity of the institution into data protection, because this is a very new space. You need to build your capacity. So in other words, you cannot tell someone what to do if you yourself don't know exactly what to do. So I think a fundamental foundational priority is to ensure that we have the capacity to handle data protection as an authority. So another fun thing, another thing that we're also working on is to ensure that we have a system. So recently we were opportune to engage in a study tour with Nigeria and Kenya. And in Kenya, we saw that how they had a very structured system, digital system, how they moved from ICT framework to automation, and now they're talking about maturity in emerging technology. So I think it's important before we even start data protection, it's important that we do have a system in place that when we start, it's easier to be able to address some of the issues that will come in terms of handling complaints, because you don't want to go ahead and start doing outreach. I mean, telling people about the data rights, and then they come with a lot of complaints, and you as an institution, you don't have that means that mechanism in place, a strategy to handle that complaint. So in another sense, you you also have to create your structure in a way that you will build trust. So I think this is very important. And also what we also saw in our study tour, and also we consider it as a priority, is partnership. Right now, I think, like I said, the main challenge is funding. We do not have all of the resources to hire, DPOs and other key functions in the data protection directorate. So we want to see how we can use that approach, how we can leverage partnership to fill in capacity gaps. So it's something that we're thinking about. Also, what we also learned from Kenya is how they also use government institution to support training. So it's something that is important that we also consider as priority. And also, peer learning also a key priority for us as a new institution. You need to see what other people have done, what are the success stories, what are the challenges, and how you can be able to manage those emerging challenges. So peer learning is very key for us. It's something that we're really looking forward to. I mean, you can learn from other people experiences and know what step to take before you take another step, because it's important. You don't want to create a situation where, for instance, you don't want to just start, okay, when the law is passed and we just start doing awareness when we have none. develop the capacity to address complaints, because as you tell people about the data rights and they know that, oh well, my rights has been violated, they they come to you as the institution to handle those complaints, and you need to first of all build your own capacity, see how you can handle people complaints. So it's something that we're looking forward to learn from those experiences. And and one of the biggest advantage of a platform like ID for Africa is how African countries can learn from other countries' experiences instead of making that same mistake. So I think peer learning put us in a position, or give us the opportunity that we can learn and not make mistakes, at be able to see how we can ensure that we have, we function properly. So that is very, I mean, those are the priorities now that we are working on.
That's great. I love the idea of the peer learning from others in events like this. I also, something that hit me here is we talk a lot at the World Bank about what's going to happen to jobs in the era of AI. And I think data protection authorities and data protection officers, that's one of the areas where jobs are pretty secure probably going forward. Okay, let's open this up to the audience. Are there any questions that you have for this panel? It's feel free to raise your hand and we'll bring you a mic.
Thank you, Dad. My question is for Judesha, actually. You have spoken AI governance strategy, and I wanted to ask you precisely about that intersection where data governance and data protection intersect with AI governance, because I think that that's the soft spot where a great part of the DPA's work is going to be like focused in the future. Thank you.
Thank you for this question again. Definitely, it's a prime importance for us. The data strategy and then the AI strategy. So we launched the data strategy in January, and the AI strategy was launched last month. And now we are going to have the DPO guide on AI, which will be launched this year. So we are going in a sequence timing here, because we believe that all these initiatives are interconnected, and AI data governance by the Ministry of ICT and also the Data Protection Office. So all these documents will interact with each other, and we're going to enforce some mechanisms, additional mechanisms, which are not to be found in data protection laws or even cybersecurity laws, but we're going to come up with these through these documents and try to educate people on the importance of AI. But it also, if you allow me on this, is that we have a section in our Data Protection Act which talks about AI, artificial intelligence, which is inspired from the EU GDPR. That is human in the loop, that is human oversight for all AI automated activities. And there are some exceptions, like where it is provided by the law, where there is explicit consent, when there is a contractual requirement. So we do regulate AI in the merchant context through the Data Protection Act. For now, because we're not going in enacting AI laws very soon, because we believe in a soft approach, trying to understand the impact and ambit of AI before we actually embark on any type of regulation for AI. So this is where we are. Thank you.
Do any of the other panelists want to respond on anything on this?
Je crois que je l'avais évoqué tout à l'heure lors de mon développement pour dire que notre État a adopté déjà une stratégie nationale de gouvernance de l'IA pour encadrer l'utilisation de l'IA. En tant que tel, nous, comme partie prenante, autorité de régulation, nous sommes là donc pour apporter aussi notre touche par rapport à l'encadrement, l'autorisation qui doit être donnée pour toute demande d'autorisation de traitement des données à caractère personnel. Là, nous accompagnons au cours de nos formations toutes les structures donc à l'usage donc vertueux plutôt donc des réseaux sociaux et surtout donc de la minimisation au niveau des données qu'on fournit sur l'internet. Il faudrait donc pouvoir contrôler soi-même et minimiser ces données et ne pas pouvoir donc se rendre victime de donc d'utilisation abusive donc de l'IA. Donc voilà un peu. Donc à notre niveau, je crois que, comme l'a dit l'État, déjà adopté une stratégie nationale d'encadrement donc de gouvernance de l'IA. Nous, en tant qu'autorité de régulation maintenant, nous procédons donc au cours des autorisations que nous donnons aux responsables de traitement. Nous procédons donc à l'étude minutieuse donc des dossiers pour s'assurer donc disons de traitement effectif que le responsable veut opérer et voir comment on va orienter les recommandations et injonctions qui doivent être faites pour pouvoir donc encadrer ce traitement.
Okay. With that, we are out of time, but I would like to thank my wonderful distinguished panelists here for a wonderful thing. Can we all give them a round of applause? Thank you.
Thank you so much to our panelists for those very valuable insights. And to close, we will now like to discuss the regional dimension of trust with Rose Mosero. Rose Mosero is the data protection and cybersecurity advisor to the East African community. She works under the World Bank funded East African Regional Digital Integration Project, so she's familiar to us. And she has previously served as Kenya's first Deputy Data Commissioner for Compliance, where she played a key role in shaping their country's data protection framework. So we will have a small fire chat about I will sit. We have just heard different views about how data safeguards and even some touches about how cybersecurity is also so relevant all along the DPA process. And we are here in this conference with everybody is from all different parts of Africa, and there is such a complex regional governance system all across the continent. in particular, you work for the East African community. So I would like to ask you first if you can draw us a small overview of the governance of data protection and cybersecurity all along the continent, how the African Union and other more regional organizations interact with each other.
Hopefully you can hear me.
Mhm.
So I think we're all aligned in the sense that there's the African Union agenda, which majority of maybe maybe I should draw a framework. So there's obviously the African Union, which encompasses the 54 countries, and then there's a regional economic communities, which the countries fall into. They're smaller chunks, I guess. And some countries are a part of two, some countries are just a part of one, and then there is a national level. So within the broader sense, the African Union sets a pace in terms of the agenda. So in this case, the AU agenda 2063, and that there is different components for cybersecurity, for data protection, the data policy, and trade. Obviously, the African Continental Free Trade Agreement, and again also the conventions such as the Malabo Convention on cybersecurity and personal data protection. And then with that, the RECs then tried to implement them based on their own priorities. So within the EAC, for example, we do have the treaty, which also deals with a number of things. So within the EAC, cybersecurity and data protection encompasses a broad range of things. Some of the our pillars for the EAC include the common markets of free movement of people, free movement of goods, capital, and we're trying to implement the aspect of data as well. So there's a lot of shared infrastructure around that, which requires protection, and then obviously at a national level. Now, obviously, everyone has the ambition of having, data governance, cybersecurity strategies, but there's also the knowledge that we're not just moving one as national, as partner states or member states singularly. We have to ensure that we are able to engage with other members of, be it the community or the African Union, and so there must be structures to ensure that happens. So far, there has been movements in terms of having, data protection authorities and cybersecurity authorities and regulators, but this has mostly been in a siloed approach. And so, what we're doing as a regional economic communities is to ensure that, based on the continental agenda, we're having structures that are almost bite-sized, as I said. So you have in EAC the eight partner states being able to communicate with each other and have harmonized frameworks and have coordination mechanisms so that when they then are able to deal with other X, there's already that sort of coordination that's happening um, in that space. So it's not a matter of just going large and then being able to actually implement and coordinate in a way that is practical. There's testing, sort of like a piloting framework that has to happen, and that's what really is happening within the regional economic blocks, or communities, and specifically within the EAC as well.
Thank you. Thank you. Really interesting. And coming back, this is crazy. Speaking at the same time that you hear yourself with this. Coming back to the first presentation that we did in the session, as my colleague said, we have spoken about how data is embedded in every single section of the of the of the DPI lifecycle, and that is why I wanted to ask you. Let's get more closer to the real experience. So I know that you have in the EAC many initiatives regarding interoperability, even digital ID and so on. So I wanted to ask you, in practice, what have you done to implement safeguards precisely in those processes, in those initiatives you have?
Um, so there's a lot of engagement that has been done, and safeguards that have been put in, based on it, like at a treaty level, the requirements of each partner state to actually implement safeguards. But that's usually partner state to partner state, so public sector sort of interactions. But unfortunately, little has been done on a regional scale in terms of um, assisting private sector and what have you. So, for example, you mentioned, some of the initiatives we have. Um, Interoperability when it comes to digital ID systems, and this has been ongoing for a while. So if I want to move to Uganda from Kenya, I don't have to go with a passport. My ID card is can be read, and so a very similar system to what you might utilize in Europe, for example. Um, and so we've got that in terms of a single customs union. We have that. There are a number of other initiatives that are ongoing. We're starting with the payments gateways as well within countries and having those that payment infrastructure so that it's cheaper for digital payments to actually occur within the region. But unfortunately, these are all engagements on a partner state level and a public sector level. So what we have done, and through the IRDA project, which I'm working on, is trying to harmonize data protection laws. Try to find a way where we are moving not just from the aspect of a single territory within the EAC and having movement of people, but also having movement of data. So having a single data territory within the EAC. With that, there are a number of things that need to happen. One, there must be coordination of data protection authorities, which is something that we're working to, and harmonized laws. So we're not having one country have strict data localization provisions and the other country having, freedom of movement. It just won't work. Otherwise, the information won't flow. Businesses won't be able to engage and trade within the region. Where then, and so that requires a harmonized framework when it comes to that, safeguards for individuals, enforceable provisions, remedies, and what have you. Then we have on the cybersecurity side, one having a regional cert, which will actually help. This is I guess, or CSERT, so cybersecurity incidents response team, which will help in coordination of cross-border incidences, but also ensure that we're able to coordinate. So at the moment, again, we're mostly working on, if I know you, then I can engage with you unofficially to say, how can you help with this? But there needs to be a coordination mechanism, especially because we have so much shared infrastructure within the region. So this is some of the things that we're helping, and it's a foundational level for the region to work, but also will be able to be scalable once we have the other regional economic communities doing the same, so that there is a coordination that happens to meet with the agenda of the African Union and the AFCFTA when it comes to trade implementation and shared infrastructure as well.
I'm I'm particular I'm particularly interested in what you mentioned, like really slightly in the middle of your fantastic exposition, was about the safeguards that you may have implemented for digital finance. And I think that's one of the key issues because we have spoken so much this whole conference, and we are here to speak about digital identity and how that how all of the efforts we make in order to get successful results. But actually, one of the main uses of all of these measures of DPI and so on is to have a direct impact in the life of citizens, and the area in which digital identity and trusted digital identity can have a greater impact in each citizen's life is usually finance. So I wanted to ask you if you could go a little bit deeper into that, if there are specific safeguards that are necessary for finance, if there are special measures that you have been taking in that regard or so on.
Yep. So I mean, there are a number of measures, not just when you look at, I guess, anti-money laundering and know your customers and what have you. They're all laying within a platform. So one of the things that I do want to say within the East African community, the aspect of digital payments and mobile money has been a huge success. And so you'll find majority of the citizens of East Africa usually primarily operate using your mobile money and your M-Pesas or Momo or whatever is available. And so that's one of the areas that we're really trying to see whether we can have interoperability when it comes to that. One of the again, as I said, one of the safeguards that we're trying to have is the aspect of data protection again, which is a very key requirement for cross-border data payments, know your customer as well as sharing, so that there is the aspect of, I think this was spoken about, data minimization, purpose limitation, to ensure that there is no overreach when it comes to collection of information. There's protections for individuals, but also the certainty that regardless of where you are, you'll be protected from, um, misuse of your data. One of the other aspects that we're looking at is, within the ecosystem, ensuring that there's coordination mechanisms, as I've already mentioned. But we do have a strong, one of the areas that we found is we do have a strong coordination within the central banks, and usually financial regulators are very spot on when it comes to coordination because they are very reliant on each other. But um, with this, there's only so much that they can do. So within their countries, they're trying to build infrastructure to support their individual countries when it comes to their own payment systems and gateways. But again, coordination wise, in terms of the EAC, there's not much of that that's going on. So I'll still keep coming back to the aspect of having the safeguards when it comes to cybersecurity and data protection, which are key, in addition to the regulatory safeguards when it comes to anti-money laundering and the coordination of central banks and harmonization of the laws that actually support digital payments, when it comes to that. So in one aspect, to answer your questions, there's a regulatory frameworks that are ongoing for coordination, but there is also um, the regulator coordination that's also happening. But the harmonization, I think, is a key safeguard that we're working towards, because that's having those standards and those and the ability to tap enforceable remedies, is something that needs to be present, in addition to just the infrastructural um, development that is ongoing.
Thank you, thank you. I think we all have learned today, or at least we have confirmed that laws and regulations are not enough, that we need to take a step forward. And we just had the fantastic opportunity to hear here like three fantastic DPAs in different stages in their home countries. And I think that that's really important, because we need to like reach to the next level. We need to reach enforcement, we need to reach accountability, and we need to reach proper oversight in order to make that these safeguards, they are not just paper, and they actually get put in practice. So precisely about that, and following the conversation that we just had a few minutes ago, basically, I wanted to ask you that in the East African community, you have different countries. Each one of them, they have their own institutions, they have their own DPAs, and even if there might be a common policy, there might be a common framework that allows you to go together, then in practice you need to rely on proper national institutions to enforce and to properly apply those regulations or common frameworks. So my question to you is, how do you work with that? How do you work with different DPAs? How you make sure that in the end there is a proper cohesion or harmonization about the way in which all the initiatives that you work about and all the safeguards that you implement are properly implemented in the for the citizen in the final delivery.
Within the ERDIP project, we actually have, and the broader EAC work streams, we have three ways in which we're doing that. The first is we started having knowledge exchange or peer exchanges with data protection authorities. At the moment, we only have, I think there would be five functional data protection authorities out of eight, and seven countries that have data protection laws. So there's just one that is still in the process of establishing. So in that, there's obviously varying capacity. So you have Kenya that is deemed to be a mature data protection authority with enforcements that's happening. You have Uganda represented here as well. You have Rwanda, but then the rest are kind of still trying to build up their structures. And so there's a need, one, to ensure that they understand the journey, are able to speak to each other, are able to share their practices as well. That's one thing that we're doing. The second is having the harmonized frameworks, which we've spoken about. The third one is having, and this is something that is still under development, but having a toolkit to assist, especially when it comes to cross-border um, practice, where if there is a transfer that's ongoing, there is a toolkit that provides, how assessment of safeguards are actually done within a national level, so that if, say, for example, and I'll use Uganda, Baker's team from Uganda has looked at the assessment of the safeguards of an institution. Then the Kenyan team doesn't have to go and verify, because they are certain that the same playbook is used in Uganda and will be used in Kenya for transfers. So those are just, and this is just a workable, um, I guess, toolkit or playbook for now. The overall ambition of the East African community is to have a mechanism and a regional law, and I'll just explain the aspect of a regional instrument, for those who don't understand how the EAC operates. The EAC has three arms, similar to regular government. So we have the secretariat that works as the executive, we have a legislative assembly, and we have a judiciary. And so, as part of the treaty, once the EAC makes a regional instrument, the regional instrument, insofar as it deals for this particular case, we'll be dealing with cross-border transfers and safeguards and coordination of data protection authorities, will be deemed to be superior to the national laws. So with this, part of the activities that would be ongoing to ensure that there is a strong framing is capacity building, so that it's not just the stronger data protection authorities remaining as they are and leaving behind the ones that are still establishing. So it will be, the coordination will also assist in ensuring that if audits are to be done, if assessments are to be done, there is assistance that is being given by the stronger DPAs, so weaker DPAs, and vice versa. In addition to just having the coordination mechanisms for enforcement and what have you. So it kind of doesn't take away from the national data protection authorities, but it augments what they're doing, and specifically ensures that everyone's kind of moving and strengthening, and there is if I may use a term, economies of scale when it comes to regulatory practice, because you're not just working as one data protection authorities. You've got the force of, eight or seven data protection authorities behind you, if you ever need them. Yeah, which I think is extremely important. Given that, one, there's always an aspect to think about. The sovereignty of a country, and so there's a need for your individual national data protection authorities, but we're no longer working as just one country in isolation. We live in a connected ecosystem, and so there is a need for us to think about solutions um, that is suitable for a connected digital economy. We can't just say, okay, fine, we have a national data protection authority, and it's going to suffice, because if something happens, and we've seen examples of, even within the East African community, examples of Kenya seeking assistance from Uganda for enforcement activities. But that's just a bilateral agreement. You Having a structure to accommodate that on a multilateral level within the eight partner states that can actually be scalable to 54 partner states when time comes, is something that is needed. So EAC is moving forward as being the test case for that sort of activity and work.
And for cybersecurity, does the do the coordination mechanisms work the same, work similarly? So I know that usually it's an area where the technical sides matter much more, which makes it easier usually to reach some common agreements.
So cybersecurity, again, is something that we're still working on. So in this case, the development of standards. But one of the things that is different for us within the EAC, whilst we're not developing a new institution, or we're not establishing a new institution for data protection authorities, where, as I mentioned, we're going to be building a regional CERT. This regional CERT will be specifically important for cross-border incidences, but as part of that, there will be a capacity building function for national cybersecurity teams. Um, and there'll also be a coordination framework that will be a part of that. So it's very active in the sense that we'll be utilizing players within the national cybersecurity teams to actually support the regional certs. And so there's a forced coordination that will happen at a day-to-day basis, which is very different from what we're doing with the data protection authorities. One of the other things as well that we're doing to ensure that we're supporting the national cybersecurity teams is we'll be doing so there's a community of practice to ensure that there's a trust ecosystem that is built, because I think that's really important. And even though we share the similar objectives and similar goals within the East African community, there's still cybersecurity is still seen as a very sensitive issue, even with shared infrastructure. And so there's a need to ensure that that's happening. And we're even borrowing a playbook from military training spaces where creating a common problem to be solved by cybersecurity professionals, so that you can build that trust ecosystem and they are able to work together. And they know that because we had cyber drills that were joint, and we'd had to work together to actually ensure that we're solving these problems. And so it's a lot easier for that sort of collaboration to happen. So it's slightly different to what we're doing with data protection, but I think there was a decision simply because of the sensitivities that attach to cybersecurity, regardless of the fact that there is shared infrastructure within the East African community.
Thank you, Rose. So, just for getting into the closing of the session, we have gone from from the macro. We have gone from an overview of the region. We have gone to very specific cases where you have spoken about the work you have been doing, and the East African community has done regarding implementing those safeguards within DPI life cycle. So, in order to close, I wanted to go back a little bit to the big picture and think a little bit ahead to the future. So, based on what we heard today, we heard how data is embedded in every corner of the DPI process. We have heard the status quo and the opinions, and what's the status of many DPAs all across Africa. And we have heard your remarks regarding how regional integration is actually becoming more important. I wanted to ask you a short your short reflection about how do you see the future of data protection and cybersecurity in Africa in the next 5 years, let's say.
Okay. Well, I actually think about it. It's quite exciting, because I think the framework or the ecosystem will have changed dramatically. So everyone's kind of in the process of trying to figure out how to implement the AFCFTA, which has its own changes and its own requirements when it comes to data protection and cybersecurity. So I'm hopeful, and also within the different regional economic blocks, there's conversations happening around harmonization, so that they can fit into the overall AU agenda to ensure that trade is happening um, in a more seamless way. So what I see happening within the space is a lot more harmonized laws within the continent. A lot of engagement that is not necessarily superficial or just knowledge exchange, but engagement in terms of enforcement activity happening across. And there's an increased enforcement activity happening, but not at a national level, but cross-border coordination in that sort of sense. I do see for cybersecurity, I think strengthening within the region, not just for the African certs, but also regionally, building blocks. So I mentioned about EAC, but there's also activity happening in EGAD when it comes to building a information sharing center, or an ISAC specifically for the EGAD partner states, and this is happening across the board. I think work will probably be happening in SADC for this sort of work. So I do see a lot of coordination and strengthening of capacity within the region when it comes to cybersecurity. I do think, though, well, AI as well will be a real topic, and so there's a need to strengthen specifically for that. As we see, we've heard strategies are coming up, but I think in the next few years, we probably will be seeing laws as well being implemented, or being drafted and passed, and implementation starting. And so with that, there's a lot of strength in terms of data protection and cybersecurity, and coordination, and um, staffing perhaps of data protection authorities, which might be de facto AI regulators, specifically because a lot of countries don't have the appetite to actually have new regulators come up. So we might even see a change in the landscape of what data protection authorities actually look like within the continent. Um, so it's exciting times ahead. 5 years seems like a long time, but it also is a short time. And so practically speaking, in terms of regulations, I do see a lot of changes in regulations. One of the things that we're noticing, and this is, Kenya is in the process of seeking an adequacy decision. I think Mauritius is also in the process of doing that. Rwanda has just started. So that will be interesting to see how that flows within the EAC with the regional instruments. We're trying to see whether we can have, again, strengthen numbers by having a common framework that will encourage us seeking adequacy with other regions, as a region. And so we'll be seeing a lot of that as well, which will be, might change, again, what regulatory instruments look like, simply because we'll be more geared to, GDPR, and enforcement might be more closely linked to what the GDPR framework is. So exciting times ahead.
Thank you so much, Rose. I would like to ask an applause for her. And now for closing up the session, I would like to bring 3 takeaways. That it's necessary to implement proper oversight and institutional accountability in order to make sure that the DPI is protected all through the process, that those safeguards are essential to ensure trust, and to make sure that all the citizens end up using DPI and end up benefiting from that part of the from those policies. And lately, that no country alone can face all of the challenges of these risks, and regional cooperation is essential. So, merci beaucoup. Muito obrigado. Thank you very much.
They're members based and working from the global majority countries, as well as national and regional levels from over 55 plus countries, as well as several goals that each of these members from all these different continents hold. So next, please. Hello. Next slide. We're experiencing in real time what it looks like to be held back by the changing times. But yes. Okay. Slides aside, I think we could go forward. So the sorry, I think that. That's good. Thank you. Thank you. I'll go back. Okay. Thank you. So, as the Human Rights for ID Coalition has continued with its work, we came to the realization that as digital identity implementation is being done across multiple countries at the same time, and sometimes at staggered stages, there are things that we've noticed. some of our core concerns and how we came up with a common position as a coalition, and also just to speak from the same tone and the same voice, is we noticed that there was evidence of negative impact. There was issues around mandatory use. There was issues around the need for alternative options in the event that digitization is not moving the way it needs to move, and also just to ensure that people have access either way. And there was also the insistence on the need for no mandatory enrollment. As the common position was being done, there was several stages that it took. There was research, and development, there was research across multiple countries, there was um, multi-stakeholder engagements from government, development partners, to civil society, to use cases where people were being asked in instances when mandatory enrollment has happened, what has it resulted to? And in most cases, it was apparent that human rights violations were happening in instances where mandatory enrollment was happening. So, with this knowledge in mind, and with interregional as well as intercontinental context, we came up with a common position as a coalition, working in multiple continents in multiple contexts against mandatory enrollment. Next. So, and also just going back to the issue of already pre-existing issues that were there were instances where people had had issues with source documents, people had had issues with enrollment, people had had lack of access to nationality and like legal identity to begin with. So with that in mind, it is very important at the end of the day to humanize those instances, because we could be talking from the point of um, uh, the fact that it's all on paper, but then I will hand over the mic to my colleague Chrissy Chengu to take it over and give an instance of um, lived experience.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Christy Chitengu, and for the longest time, I was excluded from most services like healthcare, access to education, and that was because I was stateless. And it is through this lens how I want to go about framing the exclusion that is compounded by digitization and digital identity systems. Because even on a paper-based system, which I was still very much excluded, and many people were still excluded. And so I think it's important that as we talk about the costs of exclusion and how that manifests, that we do it also by recognizing and the acute challenges that stateless communities face, and also how rapid digitization without meaningful participation of impacted people and without taking precautions could lead to a digital statelessness where people who are not necessarily stateless could be excluded and become stateless because of the rapid digitization. And that touches on a paper myself and a colleague have written, and hopefully we'll be able to share with you all in time. One of the most important lessons from a digital identity systems is that the exclusion is really technical only. It's lived and it's embodied and it's very much human. This is why incorporating those directly impacted is critical, and is something the global movement goes about doing by ensuring that impacted people are leading the charge against statelessness, and it's something that the digital movement should incorporate to move beyond consultation to more collective agenda setting and solutions orientation rather than merely convening people to consult. When someone can't authenticate, enroll, or be recognized by a digital ID system, the consequence is not simply an administrative inconvenience. It can mean losing access to healthcare, education, banking, and mobility. And as Miriam mentioned, the HR for ID Coalition emphasizes that identity systems directly affect one's dignity, privacy, and equality. On paper, these digital ID systems are often described as being efficient and innovative and inclusive, but when we are able to engage those with the lived experience, it becomes then more clear that fingerprints can fail, that documents can go missing, internet access is inconsistent, especially in the global south where there's a massive digital divide. Those are considerations that need to be to come to the fore that can only be put on the agenda if those impacted are part of those conversations, and where there's nationality that's in dispute or someone simply can't navigate that system, people then experience exclusion by the system that's designed to enable access and is to be more fast and innovative, and that perspective is essential. A central idea in our article that I mentioned on digital statelessness is that people can become digitally invisible even when they legally exist, and someone may legally be a citizen, refugee, or permanent resident, but if that digital system cannot recognize them, they can effectively become excluded from state services and protections. And so the questions I want to leave to the room, and maybe we'll explore during the various workshops, is whether lived experience turns abstract governance questions into human realities. I think that's something we need to contend with, and that the people most affected by digital ID systems are often the least ones involved in designing them, and how we can move towards being more inclusive in that aspect. I'll hand over to Miriam.
Um, thank you. So um, from from the both just introducing what the Human Rights for ID Coalition does and emphasizing on the need to know that there is people behind the systems being implemented, behind the governance decisions that are being made. We are then gonna move on into a four-person panel that will be moderated by my colleague Susan Mape, and I will leave it to her to introduce that. Thank you very much. A round of applause for Susan. Woo, 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 woo. Thank you very much.
Get a good afternoon back. But yes, please. I'd like to invite my panel upstage. We're going to be discussing mandatory identity, and I will introduce my panelists as they come. Okay, okay. Is this better? Okay, is this better? Okay. All right, thank you very much. So I am joined on stage by Angela Kasule Nabowe from ISA. I'm so sorry, I'm getting some signal from. Okay. Thank you, sorry about that. So on stage, I'm joined by Angela Nabowe Kasule from ISA. Angela, you're welcome. And I'm also joined by Shruti Trikanad from the Internet Research Lab. Shruti, you're welcome. I'm also joined by Darinka Vasquez from UNDP. You're welcome, Darinka. And the only man on the panel, I'm glad we don't have a Manel, Matthew McNaughton from Co-Develop. You're welcome, and thank you for gracing our panel. I will take a sit.
Thank you, everyone. When you look at this year's theme, it recognizes that digital ID works best when implemented with people-centered laws, institutions, safeguards, inclusion, and accountability. And so making digital ID work for everyone, especially for vulnerable and marginalized communities, is key. And
Vous entendez?
when you look at the work that the Initiative for Social and Economic Rights, ISA, has been doing over years, it is about making digital ID work for everyone, and which is the case for also many people in this room and
Là, ça
the
marche?
Human Rights for Digital Identity Coalition. So in Uganda, digital ID is mandatory, so it governs everything from old age pension, where citizens aged 80 and above receive pension, so you need the digital ID, to livelihood programs and everything. So it governs everything, and because of that, the burden of registration is placed on people. So people are forced to go and register because they will not be able to receive services. But that is problematic where you still have legal challenges, institutional challenges, and systems challenges. For instance, we have people who are stateless, like the Maragori, and because of the constitutional setup, they are not able to acquire IDs. So they are typically excluded from everything. And the only way they can get about is masquerading as coming from other tribes or doing naturalization, which is also very problematic and costly. So, but we also have the issue of distance that people have to make to the NERA offices. I know that in the new enrollment, they have tried to reduce the distance, but it is still problematic for some people in hard to reach areas and persons with disabilities. And that is why, as ISA, we have gone out to do outreaches with NERA and set up camp in different local governments and do also registration, and it is worked in some areas. The other thing is that we are in the second generation ID, registration is going on. We thought that we would use that opportunity to correct errors that came from the original ID, where many, for instance, older persons could not access benefits because of the errors on their IDs. But we have missed that opportunity because still people are required to do, change of particulars, a process which is very expensive and still locking them out of the system. But also there are people who are registering and they have not received IDs. And because they have not received IDs, these are not even old people, they are young people, but they cannot access livelihood programs. So they are excluded from, those programs. So, and what we are trying to do is, the problem with Uganda is that digital ID has been attached to citizenship. And what we need to do is some kind of reforms, first of all, to, some decoupling. We need to do decoupling to, because these are two separate things. So there's legal and identity, and then there's citizenship. So those two have to be separated to make sure that legal identity is available to everyone. Also, they also need to do constitutional recognitions for tribes like the Maragori, because we have court judgments where the courts have upheld that these people are indigenous, so why not include them? The other thing that we need to do, when you look at the registration portal, it has data fields like tribe. And we do believe that this is locking out people. So why do we need information about tribes? Because some of these data fields are becoming statutory problems and locking out people. But we need to only collect data for purposes of identification. But also when it comes to tribes in our context, we see that it can lead to other things like profiling, and we have seen how tribal wars in some of our African countries have led to problems. And we have countries that have progressed like Ethiopia, that information is not needed. Rwanda, that information is not needed. So why do we have to maintain it? It is not necessary. And when you look at international practices around data collection, you know, you only collect what is necessary, what is, you know, you don't need all that data. Then the other thing is that moving closer to communities, we have seen examples from Ethiopia where they have onboarded agents to be able to do registration even in the hard to reach areas. So that could also happen in our context because it's locking out people. But then continuous engagement with civil society, with communities to make sure that no one is left behind. And for our case, what we need actually is a whole human rights impact assessment to make sure that we see who is locked out, why are they locked out, and what remedies are necessary. Because where we are going, now they have introduced digital ID for taxation to register for taxes, but we are also into conversations of introducing a national health insurance scheme. You know, these are matters of health, which means that they're also going to use digital ID to be able to access that service. But also when it comes to taxes, there's a lot of informality not only in Uganda but Africa. You want to bring more people into the tax bracket. How are you going to do that when there's no trust, when you're looking out people? So we should, government has to see the benefits of this and make sure it is people-centered and not lock out people, because for some of these services like healthcare, social protection, it is a lifeline for many people. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Angela, and thank you really for setting the tone and sharing some of the experiences that you've had. It takes me straight on to Darinka. You've raised so many harms, so many challenges that people are facing on a day-to-day basis. But Darinka, UNDP does a lot of work around the DPI safeguards. So, to what extent do these safeguards help to address exclusion and challenges that some of these marginalized groups experience?
Yes, thank you for the question and thank you for having me as part of this panel. First of all, the UNDPI safeguard framework is jointly stewarded by UNDP, by the Office of the Secretary General Envoy on Technology, ODET. And what it does, it brings the broad guiding principles for all DPI systems. And when this means that when a country is working on its own DPI system, it needs to take these principles and these safeguards and contextualize them to its own legal, social, institutional reality. So that's one. When it comes to ID specifically, UNDP has developed the UNDP Digital ID Governance Framework, and what it does specifically, it helps governments understand better what are the needed safeguards that they need to embed into the across the ID life cycle, and understand whether there are the necessary conditions and mechanisms, governance instructions, protections in place when deploying an ID system. UNDP's approach starts from the recognition that, of course, exclusion is not an isolated issue. On the contrary, it's very central to ID systems, and vulnerable groups, such as the one you mentioned, and undocumented individuals, stateless persons, refugees, they are often affected by the fact of it. And what we want to do is basically try to avoid that when these digital ID systems become mandatory, these people are automatically locked out from services, from economic participation, from private services. So what the framework does is it examines whether countries have these concrete measures in place for vulnerable people, is, for example, alternative and offline pathway, assisted enrollment mechanisms, human review and grievance systems, non-discrimination protections. And importantly, the framework doesn't stop only on identifying the risk and understanding the gaps, but it also through an assessment that we are currently working in, we are trying to provide actionable recommendations and pathways for governments to embed these. And these recommendations can come from strengthening birth registration systems, creating alternative identification mechanisms, involving civil society from the design through implementation all the way to monitoring, or working specifically in strategies for undocumented and stateless populations through a full process redesign. And this is because the framework safeguards approach recognizes that exclusion is often created not only by law, but how in practice systems operate. So even when enrollment is technically voluntary, when people need to access some of these services, they are automatically, they need to access digital ID systems. So this is why the framework emphasizes two principles: privacy by design and inclusion by default. And what this means is that vulnerable groups should not be treated as an exception and an afterthought after the system is deployed, but on the contrary, they should be intentionally considered from the very design of the system, enrollment, authentication process, service integration, etc. So the objective is not simply building a digital ID system that works technically well, but building infrastructure of trust that can protect rights, especially from vulnerable populations, that can maintain public trust, and that ensure that these vulnerable populations are not locked out from fundamental services. And finally, the success of ID systems should not be only measured by enrollment numbers. It should be also measured whether countries can build this trust infrastructure that can expand inclusion services. And for UNDP, digital ID systems only have value as long as they provide use cases that benefit people, that benefit citizens. And to be completely honest, there are only a few countries that have adopted the framework. So there is a lot of work ahead of us to onboard countries in adopting the UN DPI safeguards framework. And that's why also we are now trying to revamp the an ID toolkit to actually help governments translate all these principles into practical action points that governments can use during implementation.
There are
Musa, Shuti, and Danny. So we'll just have a really brief introduction. That
Hi, I'm Shuchi Purohit, and I worked at the Global Movement Against Statelessness.
Hello everyone, my name is Yasa Musa. I represent Pan-African Nationality Network and the Nubian Rights Forum.
Bonjour tout le monde, moi je m'appelle Dani Mtendela Ngena, je viens de la République démocratique du Congo, je travaille avec l'organisation Vision Défi et Leader pour le développement, je suis chargé de projet. L'organisation Vision Défi et Leader pour le développement travaille avec les séparés. Est-ce qu'on va présenter un rapport? Maria. Peut-être Maria. Les pays voisins, ils arrivent en RDC et ils sont reconnus comme ils ont les cartes d'identité. Ils ont les cartes d'identité, mais il n'y a pas quelque chose de digital qui montre que quand vous arrivez à faire un enrôlement, qu'est-ce qui montre réellement que vous êtes de la nationalité. Donc, on va réfléchir que devient les personnes sans acte de naissance, mais aussi comment identifier les déplacés internes. Ensuite, on va réfléchir sur l'identité numérique peut-elle réduire l'exclusion ou l'aggraver. Merci. Nous réfléchissons d'abord sur la première question. Oui. La première question est de savoir, dans un État où il n'y a pas une base de données de tous les citoyens, donc il n'y a pas une base de données de tous les citoyens, ou soit il n'y a pas quelque chose de spécial où on va se baser de savoir tel est citoyen et tel n'est pas citoyen. Comment on peut reconnaître réellement les vrais citoyens? Ça, c'est la première question. It is in French. They speak both French and English.
Can you hear me? Um, okay. So we want to do a quick debrief of what we discussed in the breakout sessions. I think it's always imperative to put the human element when discussing human rights. I think each of the groups selected a rapporteur or a representative. So I'll just ask each of the representatives from each of the groups to come join me on the stage. We'll have a quick debrief of what was discussed, what scenarios were posed to the attendees, and what we can learn and the calls to action after this. So can I just have the rapporteurs come join me on stage really quickly? All right, so just in brief, you can let us know your name, your organization, and what the scenario that, or the thematic area that was posed to your group and the lessons we've learned from that, and if there are any calls to action we can garner from that. Maybe we'll do like 2 minutes each, just for the sake of time. So we can start with you.
What is the question?
So the question was, so you start with your name, your organization. What was the question that was, or what was the scenario that was posed to your group, and what lessons were learned? What was the discussion? Are there any calls from action we can get from the group discussion?
Selon ce que nous avons discuté tout d'abord. Je commence par me présenter. Je réponds au nom de Ntendela Dani. Je travaille avec l'organisation Vision Défi et Leader pour le développement à l'est de la RDC. L'organisation Vision Défi et Leader pour le développement travaille avec la communauté autochtone Pygmée, Mbouti et Batwa dans le village de la forêt du Tombo. Et dans notre groupe de travail, on a discuté sur les questions suivantes, de savoir qui est réellement reconnu comme citoyen. La deuxième chose, c'était de savoir que deviennent les personnes sans acte de naissance, parce que nous traversons une période de conflit, une période de guerre, où quand vous fuyez, vous ne portez rien. Vous fuyez tel qu'avec les habits que vous portez sur votre corps. Et c'est la situation de l'Est et de la RDC. À part ça, il y a aussi une autre question que nous avons réfléchi, c'est la succession des événements en ce qui concerne l'identité numérique. On a réfléchi sur le gouvernement de Mobutu qui a été remplacé par le gouvernement de Laurent Désiré Kabila. Quand on a remplacé le gouvernement de Mobutu par le gouvernement de Laurent Désiré Kabila, on a été obligé de recommencer à zéro parce que le gouvernement tout a été obligé d'être remplacé. Après le gouvernement de Laurent Désiré Kabila, le gouvernement de Joseph Kabila est entré et on a été encore obligé de recommencer à zéro. On a été obligé de recommencer à reconstruire toutes les institutions à zéro. Et c'est, pour le moment, le gouvernement de Joseph Kabila, c'est une succession que nous suivons à présent, donc depuis 2006. Et compte tenu de cela, il y a plusieurs difficultés à l'est de la RDC et dans toute la République démocratique du Congo en ce qui concerne l'identité numérique. Chez nous au Congo, quand on parle de l'identité numérique, selon ce que nous avons expliqué, nous avons montré que l'identité numérique en RDC, ça se base sur les passeports, mais aussi les documents qui permettent les gens de traverser les frontières. Parce que même à présent, à l'heure où je vous parle, il n'y a pas un système pour on appelle ça quoi, les cartes que les chauffeurs utilisent, je ne sais pas comment, les termes appropriés là. Avec tout ça, il y a plusieurs difficultés dans les pays fragiles, comme je vous ai expliqué le contexte de la RDC. Première difficulté de savoir qui est réellement reconnu comme citoyen. Parce que quand il y a les gens qui ont fui la RDC depuis 1997, ils sont actuellement en Tanzanie. Quand ces gens-là vont retourner, on ne sait pas, ils sont des Tanzaniens ou ils sont des Congolais. Et c'est le même problème que les gens chargés d'enregistrement de la population ont jusqu'à présent. Alors, compte tenu de cela, nous, avec notre groupe, on a réfléchi sur ces points-là. On a dit, qu'est-ce qu'on peut utiliser pour que les gens soient reconnus comme des vrais Congolais. Et la solution, à ce point que nous avons réfléchi, nous avons dit tout d'abord, on doit tout d'abord se baser sur leur tribu, leur lignée. À part ça, ils doivent avoir quelque chose de témoignages de là où ils viennent. Qu'est-ce qui justifie qu'ils sont réellement des Congolais? Est-ce que les autorités locales doivent leur donner des notes qui disent que tel est congolais ou tel n'est pas congolais? À part ça, ils doivent aussi avoir les documents des ACR, les documents des réfugiés, qui dit que celui-ci était réfugié et il retourne volontairement dans son pays. Un autre point, c'était pour le cas des majeurs, des nouveaux majeurs qui sont nés dans les villages. Parce que dans les villages, chez nous en RDC, dans le contexte de presque l'Afrique au village, il y a des enfants qui sont nés à la maison. Et même leur maman ne parte pas même à l'hôpital pour déclarer la naissance de l'enfant. Et l'enfant grandit. On connaît tous que tel, c'est l'enfant de tel, mais il n'a pas les documents qui montrent qu'il est de la nationalité. Alors, ça aussi, c'est un point c'est un point un peu compliqué pour la RDC aussi, mais aussi pour les pays les pays fragiles, les États fragiles. Alors, pour ça, nous avons aussi réfléchi sur ce point. On a vu qu'on va toujours utiliser la même procédure de se baser sur leur tribu, mais aussi sur sa famille. Alors, les difficultés, la dernière question qu'on a réfléchi, c'était si pour les tribus qui sont soupçonnées des pays étrangers. Parce que chez nous, il y a des tribus comme les tribus des Tutsis, tous les tribus des Tutsis, mais aussi les tribus qui parlent des langues des pays voisins. Ces personnes-là sont toujours discriminées. Même pendant la période d'enrôlement, ils sont toujours discriminés. Et qu'est-ce qu'on peut faire si ces tribus? C'est la dernière question que nous avons réfléchi et c'est quelque chose que nous appelons à tout le monde ici dans l'Assemblée d'y réfléchir si on peut proposer quelques solutions ensemble, à part ce que nous avons discuté dans le groupe. Merci.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you. Maybe you can let us know, what did you discuss in your group? What area did you cover? What lessons were learned? What can we do moving forward? Any calls to action, suggestions, you know?
Thanks a lot. So I will start my out.
Oh, please let us know your name and your organization.
My name is Bridget Njovu, and I work with an organization called Paradigm Initiative. I am based in Zimbabwe. And in our group, we had two scenarios that we discussed. The first scenario was of an 82-year-old man who has to walk about 20 kilometers to the nearest ID registration center. And he currently has no money. The little that he gets, he uses to buy food for his family. And then he is also missing out on services because he currently does not have an ID. That's the first scenario that we discussed. The second scenario was of a 32-year-old woman who is a refugee, and she has a national ID system has been introduced, and it is mandatory to access humanitarian assistance. So for her to access that humanitarian assistance, she has to have the national ID, and she really relies mostly on food assistance to be able to feed her. She will have faced questions with government agencies such as the national security, because the system is centralized and it's a multi-agency system where different governments have access to the same information. So I will hand over to my colleague to outline the issues that we discussed and recommendations that we came up with.
Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Kasida Abdullahi. I'm here for research purposes. So just to add on what on the cases that she has shared, some of the solutions or possible solutions to these challenges are: one is the challenge of distance, whereby in the group we proposed bringing offices closer, and this has worked for some countries in terms of advocating for more offices in the in the areas where they have difficulty in accessing registration offices. The other thing was mass enrollment, which had enabled registering a lot of people, and this was also more like mobile registrations, in areas that have challenges of distance. The other solution or practice that has worked in other countries was waiving the replacement fee for the elderly, especially for the first case that he shared for the elderly one. That this was in Uganda, but the challenge was in terms of awareness. This of the elderly people didn't know that this fee was waived. So, in terms of creating more awareness to this will be required. The other challenge was in terms of addressing corruption. The elderly man had to get, if someone loses an ID, they need to get an abstract from the police, and sometimes it face challenges in the police in terms of getting the abstract. He'll be asked to pay for money, whereby you don't even have the money. So that's also a challenge, and I don't know if awareness or something can address that. The other issue was a system failure that came across in the group in terms of documentation, duplication of IDs, some challenges such as an ID with two different names or a same ID number if it's being used for two different people, such kind of challenges. And this is mainly a system challenge failures. Specifically to the second case for the refugee persona, in terms of minimization of data collection would be very much necessary. And here I would ask, like, what data specifically is, how much minimum or the least data that's collected? And in the group, it was suggested that three main, that is the name of the person, the full name of that person, facial, the face or photo of the face, and biometric data. So in terms of others, like issues like tribe and those kind of details would not be very much necessary for protection purposes. The other thing was accepting or offering alternative identification, forms of identification. For example, if not just limiting to IDs when it comes to registering for digital ID, if someone doesn't have, I think this was also proposed in the panel, earlier panel. Also, when it comes to data protection and regulations, there also has to be, this has to be done with judicial oversight. For example, when it comes to data sharing for the purpose of protection. And lastly, setting up an independent governance grievances mechanisms. And I think this was also shared by a colleague here in India, and which has been also a best practice in terms of ensuring inclusion.
Thank you so much. I think it goes without saying that all very important points. And I noticed there's a lot of similarities among the groups. I think there are problems that we all share. And I think sessions like these are imperative in finding solutions, especially from a community perspective. So we'll just hear briefly from the last group. Let us know your name, your organization. What did you discuss? Any solutions? Do you still have questions? And so on and so on.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. My name is Shruti. I work with the Internet Research Lab in India. So our scenario was of a person who was attempting to get registered in the digital ID system, but they didn't have the required documents because their parents didn't have the required documents. So we mostly discussed some best practices that we've seen work in different countries. So one that I think the example came from Bolivia, which is that there were many, there are different scattered communities that needed to get registered, and it was hard for people to travel to be able to do that. So there were civil society facilitators that helped within a community. So I think they call it community mass registration, to get people on a database and then use that to be able to get identities. I think that was similarly done in Tanzania as well. And another example from Tanzania was some communities that were particularly affected and needed digital ID. The government reduced and then waived fees for them specifically. we also discussed other forms of registration in case people don't have birth certificates or anything else that they would need. Similar to the example from India, there were a lot of examples of community leaders or religious leaders that were able to authenticate the identity of someone to get onto the digital ID. I think South Africa also mentioned that they accepted affidavits if you didn't have a birth certificate. And then another example from Tanzania was that to deal with the problem of inadequate birth certificates, they started registering people or births in hospitals as soon as it was done automatically without requiring any sort of documentation. And the the citizenship of the child or the parents was not a concern. They accepted what the parents said as their citizenship without requiring any proof, with the caveat that the birth certificate will not, or the birth registration will not be proof of citizenship. So I think that worked to increase birth registration without people being afraid um, of not being citizens. And I think lastly, there was also a concern of for people who are not citizens or residents, but needing access to social protection. So to have a separate route for a refugee, a separate route for refugees to be in the system. I think this was particularly present for Africa with a lot of movement between countries. So yeah, to access social protection as a non-resident or citizens.
Thank you so much. Can we please have a round of applause for the representatives? Thank you so much. So as we come to a close, for the last few minutes of today's afternoon's activities, I'll invite back the panel that spoke earlier. I think following the workshops and the breakout sessions and the panel discussion and everything, the fireside chat, there's one pending question, which is basically, how do we take this forward? So following everything we've said, everything we've discussed today, all the discussions, interactions, how do we take this forward? So I'll invite back the panel, the speakers who are at the panel.
Hello? Okay. Thank you everyone for staying to the very end. We are so grateful that you could stay with us. And before we say goodbye, after all the conversations and the presentations that have been shared in the groups, I'd like to give an opportunity to my panelists who I abruptly stopped because of time limitations, to give us just their closing remarks, maybe a reflection in terms of what has come out from the groups and the conversations, and even some of the questions that were not answered. I'll start with you, Shruti. I'll give you the mic, and then you have 1 minute to, well, not really 1 minute, maybe let's say 2 minutes to, share your reflections. If you have any call to action, you can share that as well to conclude the session. Thank you.
Sure, thank you. I think what I'm learning is that, sorry, can everyone hear me? Okay. So what I'm learning is that we seem to have similar issues across countries, across continents. I think the idea of digital ID is maybe not as contentious, but the way that it is being implemented and the way that it's excluding a lot of people, a lot of voices that need to be heard is maybe what we can all come together to agree upon. I think there are a lot we can learn from each other in terms of what works, what maybe doesn't work, what we should be extra cautious about. And I think this knowledge transfer is pretty important in that regard. Um, I, I, I don't know, again, India has a long history of digital ID. We have a lot of mistakes we've made. Perhaps at the end of the day, the idea of digital ID is not so bad, but I think a lot of work needs to be done to get to a place that it works for everybody. And I think maybe a good starting point, one that a lot of people can agree upon, is that mandatory ID is maybe not something we're ready for yet. Um, uh, there are some reasons that maybe you need something to be mandatory, but I think regardless, the exclusions that it's leading to is not something that we can ignore. So yeah, I think just come back to our common position on mandatory ID, which is just that we're not ready for it yet. We need to consider viable alternative forms of ID to exist and have this be a good option for people to use if and when they want to use it. Yeah, I think that's all for me.
Um, I'm going to move on to Angela. Angela, what are some of your reflections from the conversation and what is your call to action?
So most of us here are part of the coalition, the Human Rights for Digital Identity Coalition, and we work in different countries. We have learned or listened to developments that are happening in different countries and how they have managed to overcome certain barriers. I've had examples from Benin that I'm taking away, examples from Ethiopia, examples from Rwanda, how they have overcome some of these barriers. So what I would encourage us is that when we get back and continue to do this work, how do we move together and be able to learn from each other, how you've managed to navigate certain challenges around lockout of certain populations in your areas, and how can we learn from each other. I think for me, it is very key. Already I have pointers and there are things already I have on my fingertips around, how do you reach people in the hard to reach areas, what, for instance, what Ethiopia had done, what waivers do you need to do, like what Benin did to register 2.4 million people that didn't have documents. But also for me, the issue of decoupling legal identity from citizenship is very key, and it is a conversation that would really help us not to, because what is locking us, what is locking out people is, having the two together. But these two, there are two distinct legal questions that have to be answered. But also very, very critical for me, what I wanted to, for us to take away is that when you look at Ethiopia and you look at Rwanda and how they dealt away with the data fields, especially around tribe, and leaving that completely out, because you don't need, it doesn't serve a function in identity. But we also know that these are countries that have had serious tribal wars, which we are not immune to in other African countries like Uganda. How do we get rid of those data fields, and then we can make sure that legal identity is a right for all people and not leave everyone behind, and of course continue the constant engagements with the different government agencies responsible for this, and bringing them with the duty bearers to be able to interface and make sure that they correct what is not going wrong, and also push them to have robust monitoring and evaluation functions, and also have redress mechanisms where people can come and issues be resolved, because there are people that are registering, and NIRA will come here and report that we are at 74%. But I'll tell you that myself, I'm registered. I got a message on March 19th that my ID is ready, but I've been to the center twice and the ID is not there. But I'm privileged. I have the transport. but for someone who has to travel 20 kilometers to go and get that ID. So these are some of the challenges that we need to keep engaging with these agencies and make sure that the engagements between civil society and government continue, but also with the communities, and make sure that we bring these people closer to the communities. Thank you.
Thank you. Over to you, Matthew, your reflection.
I don't have much to add. I mean, I think really to just express gratitude to the Human Rights for ID Coalition for the work that it has done to put together this position and for hosting this session. I think there's a lot more work to be done. I'm encouraged that more governments now are saying, or at least willing to figure out how to have discussions around these issues. That's definitely been something that's been better represented this year at IDF Africa. And I hope that we can continue this discourse after this event in the different countries as we work to resolve some of the issues that prevent people from participating fully in society.
Thank you very much, Matthews. I meant to say Matthew, not Matthews. So at this point, I would like to ask everyone to join me in really thanking my panel. A lot of issues have been raised from